My daughter stood in front of me, her eyes filled with irritation instead of love, and said, "You're not invited to my wedding, Dad. We want a private ceremony without you there." She spoke those words without a single pause or sign of guilt. I looked at her, nodded slowly, and walked to my room in silence. The moment she left, I picked up my phone and called the caterer. I canceled the entire wedding, every dish, every decoration, every reservation, because everything had been paid for under my name. She had no idea what was coming when she arrived at the venue and saw it completely empty. Before I continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps me keep sharing these powerful, real-life stories. My name is Arthur Reynolds, and I am 68 years old. I spent most of my life as an architect, designing homes that held people's memories, never realizing that one day, my own house would feel empty of love. My wife, Linda, passed away 4 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Losing her broke me in ways I never admitted to anyone. She was not just my wife, she was the heart of our family. After her death, the only light that kept me moving was my daughter, Sophie. She was the reason I woke up each morning. I cooked breakfast for her, helped her with school projects, and stayed up late reviewing her college applications. Every dream she had, I supported with everything I had. I promised my wife before she passed that I would be both father and mother to our daughter. I kept that promise. As Sophie grew older, she became ambitious, driven, and focused on success. She graduated, got a high-paying job, and soon after, met Nathan. He came from a wealthy family and carried himself like he was born to be admired. At their engagement dinner, Nathan's mother made a comment I will never forget. She said, "We will be planning a very high-class wedding. We want the guest list to reflect the image of our family." I ignored the tone, believing that love would guide this process, not pride. Sophie reassured me that she wanted me involved in every detail. She said, "Dad, Mom always dreamed of my wedding day. I want you to walk me down the aisle for both of you." Those words filled my heart. I told her I would cover all expenses as my final gift from myself and from her mother's memory. It was not about money. It was about love, about honoring the years of sacrifice, about a father fulfilling his duty. But as the wedding planning went on, I started noticing changes. Sophie stopped asking for my opinion. Instead of saying, "Dad, what do you think?" she would say, "Nathan's family decided this," or "Nathan's mother doesn't like that idea." My role went from father of the bride to silent sponsor. When I tried to gently remind her that this wedding was meant to be a celebration of two families coming together, she brushed me off. The first real crack appeared when she said, "Dad, Nathan's family wants the guest list limited. They said some family members don't fit the image they want to present." I asked her if she meant my side of the family, my sister, my cousins, people who had supported her since childhood. She avoided eye contact and simply nodded. I stayed silent, but my heart began to ache. A week later, she told me I wouldn't be needed at the rehearsal dinner because it was a modern format. Then she stopped sharing wedding updates altogether. I reached a breaking point when I walked into a conversation between Sophie and Nathan's mother. Nathan's mother said, "We appreciate everything your father has done, but once this wedding is complete, you will be part of our family, and certain old ties will naturally fade." Sophie didn't defend me. She didn't even respond. She just stood there. Later that evening, I asked her directly, "Am I still walking you down the aisle?" She looked uncomfortable and replied, "Dad, we're thinking about having Nathan's father do it. It's nothing personal." That was the moment I realized. I had not been excluded suddenly. I had been slowly removed, piece by piece, until only my wallet remained useful. This wedding was no longer about marriage. It had become a display of status. And while they were willing to use my money, they were ashamed of my presence. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the photo of my late wife, and I remembered her words, "Never let love turn you into someone people can step on." The very next day, Sophie came to my house and said it outright. "Dad, we're having a private ceremony. You're not invited. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her voice was cold, She saw my silence as surrender, but what she didn't know was that everything she believed belonged to her. Every guest arrangement, every plate, every flower, existed only because of me. And now, it was time she learned the difference between love freely given and love taken for granted. The day after Sophie told me I was not invited to her own wedding, I woke up before sunrise and sat at the edge of my bed, feeling a kind of pain I had never known before. It was not anger, and it was not just sadness. It was a deep sense of betrayal from the very person I had lived my entire life for. I walked through the hallway and looked at the framed photographs on the walls, the school events I had attended, the camping trips we took with her mother, the graduation day where she hugged me and said, "I wouldn't be here without you, Dad." Now those memories felt distant, like pages torn from a book I once knew. Sophie had become someone who cared more about status than family, more about appearances than love. But I did not arrive at that conclusion immediately. I wanted to believe this was temporary moodiness, stress, influence from Nathan's controlling family. So I decided to speak to her like a father who still believed there was a chance to fix things. That afternoon, I went to meet her at her apartment. She opened the door with a surprised expression, and, for a moment, I saw the same girl who used to run into my arms as a child, but it faded quickly. She crossed her arms and said, "Dad, I hope you're not here to argue." I replied in a calm voice, "I'm here to understand. I need to hear from you why you don't want me at your wedding." She sighed and avoided my eyes. "It's not personal. Nathan's parents said the event needs to be limited to people who reflect their values." I asked her gently, "Do I not reflect your values?" She hesitated, then said, "You're traditional. You don't match the image we're trying to create." Those words hit me harder than any insult, because they were not said with anger. They were said with cold certainty. As she spoke, I noticed wedding brochures and decoration plans scattered on her dining table, with Nathan's mother's handwriting all over them. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail, but I had not been included in a single decision, despite being the one paying for all of it. I asked Sophie, "Who do you think has been covering the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photography?" She looked away and said, "Nathan's family promised to reimburse you. It's their wedding now." In that moment, I understood she had not only removed me emotionally, she was also stripping away the memory of her mother's dream, replacing it with a display of wealth. It was no longer a family wedding. It was a social exhibition. I stood there quietly, watching the daughter I once carried on my shoulders now carry the expectations of people who never cared for her soul, only her image. I said, "Sophie, if your mother were here, would she be invited to your wedding?" Her eyes filled with annoyance instead of reflection. She replied, "Dad, please don't bring emotions into this. It's just a wedding. You're overreacting." That response showed me everything I needed to see. When a child dismisses a parent's pain as inconvenience, it means they no longer see them as family, but as background. That very night, I received a call from the venue asking about final payment for upgrades that Nathan's family had added. They had ordered a luxury floral entrance, champagne fountains, custom lighting, everything charged to my account. When I asked Sophie about it, she casually said, "We assumed you would take care of it, since you want what's best for me." That phrase, "what's best for me," echoed in my mind. I had always wanted what was best for her, but somewhere along the way, she began to believe best meant expensive. I had raised my daughter to be kind, not entitled, yet entitlement had taken over her heart, and every sacrifice I made was now being used against me. The next morning, I overheard a conversation while standing in the hallway outside the ESCO venue office. Nathan was speaking to the event planner, saying, "We need to make sure nothing about this wedding looks cheap. Her father means well, but his taste is outdated." He laughed, and the planner laughed back. Not once did he speak of Sophie and me as family. He spoke of me as a financial tool. That was the moment it became clear. I had allowed others to control the narrative of love I had built with my daughter. They saw me as replaceable, but what they didn't realize was that the foundation of the wedding existed only because of me. Without me, there was no venue, no catering, no arrangements. Every vendor contract had my name on it, And while they were removing me from my daughter's life, they were doing it inside a wedding that still legally and financially belonged to me. I walked back to my car, closed the door, and sat in silence. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, not trembling, not angry. In that stillness, I felt something powerful awaken inside me, not revenge, but resolve. It was time for my daughter to learn the difference between love that is freely given and love that is taken for granted, not through words, but through actions she would never forget. That night, I sat at my dining table with the lights off, the only glow coming from a single lamp in the corner of the room. In front of me were neatly stacked folders, receipts from the venue, copies of contracts with catering companies, decorator agreements, floral arrangements, photography bookings, even the cake order. Every document had one thing in common: my signature and my bank information. Not a single item had Sophie's name or Nathan's name on it. As I looked at the stack, I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. For the first time since my wife died, I felt her presence not as a memory, but as a voice in my heart, reminding me of the promise I made to her, to raise our daughter to be kind, grounded, and grateful. Somewhere, somehow, I had allowed love to blind to enabling disrespect, and love without boundaries is not love. It is loss. I stood up, walked to the phone, and called the venue coordinator. My voice was calm. I explained that I was canceling the full wedding event effective immediately. She was shocked. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She said the venue was fully prepaid and non-refundable. I told her I was aware, and I wanted the date released. I wanted the staff informed before morning. She paused, then quietly said, "I understand, Mr. Reynolds." I then called the catering company and canceled the food service for 300 guests. I called the florist and canceled the flower arches and custom arrangements. One by one, I shut down every piece of the wedding that was built on my name, my money, and my love. But I did not do this out of bitterness. I did it to reclaim dignity. When I was done, the silence in the room felt different. It was not the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace, after a decision made with clarity. I sat back down and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt in control, not of others, but of myself. This was never about punishing my daughter. It was about reminding her of the value of a father's love. The next step was not cancellation. It was transformation. Instead of letting the day vanish, I decided to turn it into something meaningful, something my wife would have approved of. I called my sister Grace and told her what happened. She was quiet at first, then said, "Arthur, your daughter forgot who raised her. It's time she remembers." Grace offered to help me organize a memorial celebration for Linda on that same date at a local community center, a place where Linda used to volunteer. Instead of a grand ballroom with gold-plated cutlery, it would be a simple gathering with friends, family, old neighbors, and people who genuinely loved us. Not for status, but for connection. The next morning, I went to the venue in person to finalize everything. The staff was respectful. Some were even sympathetic. They knew me well by then. As I left, I felt lighter. On my way out, I passed the grand staircase where Sophie dreamed of walking down in her wedding gown. I paused, placed my hand on the banister, and whispered to my wife in my heart, "I am doing this for you and for her future." Because a marriage that starts with disrespect towards the people who raised you will never build a peaceful home. As I walked out of the venue, I saw Nathan's mother arriving for a meeting. She approached with a smug smile and said, "Mr. Reynolds, I hope you are ready for big changes. From now on, our family will be making the decisions." I smiled back politely and replied, "The decisions have already been made." She frowned, confused, but I didn't stay to explain. Her confusion was only a preview of what was to come. That evening, Sophie called me. Her voice was irritated. "Dad, why did the venue manager call me? She said something about changes." I responded calmly, "Yes, I canceled everything." She gasped, "You did what? You can't do that." I took a deep breath and said, "Sophie, you told me I was not invited to the wedding, so I made sure you had the wedding you asked for. Without me, without my involvement, and without anything that came from me." There was silence on the line. Not shock, not anger. It was the silence of realization. She hung up without a word. I put the phone down, not with sadness, but with certainty. A turning point is not the moment you fight back. It is the moment you rise above being fought against. The next chapter would change everything, not through confrontation, but through truth being revealed, not by force, but by consequence. The morning of what was supposed to be my daughter's wedding day began with a stillness unlike any other. The sky was clear, and the air was warm with the kind of calm that arrives before a storm of realization. Sophie arrived at the venue in an ivory wedding dress, radiant and confident, surrounded by Nathan, his proud parents, and a photographer ready to capture every moment of what they believed would be a high society celebration. They expected flowers cascading down the entrance, golden drapes, elegant guest tables, and waitstaff lined up with silver trays. Instead, what greeted them was an empty hall. No decorations, no chairs, no music, no guests. The lights were off, and the echoes of their footsteps bounced across a bare wooden floor. Sophie froze in the doorway, her bouquet trembling in her hand. Nathan frowned, turning in confusion. His mother's mouth fell open, eyes wide with disbelief. Sophie spun around toward the event coordinator, who was standing quietly near the entrance. "Where is everything? Where are the decorations? Where is the catering staff?" she demanded. The coordinator, with a professional tone, replied, "This event was cancelled 5 days ago by Mr. Arthur Reynolds, the owner of the venue contract." Sophie slowly turned to face me as I stepped forward from the hallway. I was not dressed in a suit for a wedding. I wore a simple gray blazer, dignified, calm, and free of any traces of shame. Her eyes locked with mine, confusion slowly turning to fear. Nathan stepped in front of her and said sharply, "Is this some kind of joke?" I answered with steady clarity, "No, this is the wedding you asked for, a private ceremony without me." Sophie's lips parted, stunned into silence. The truth was not shouted. It was not forced. It stood in the emptiness of that room, like a mirror reflecting everything they had chosen. Nathan's father tried to interject, his tone full of authority. "You had no right to do this." I looked at him without breaking eye contact and replied, "I had every right. I paid for everything. The venue was booked under my name. The caterer, the florist, the decorator, all contracts were signed by me. And you made it very clear I was not invited to the wedding that was built on my effort and my wife's memory. So now you may proceed with your private ceremony as you insisted." Sophie stepped forward, tears forming in her eyes, but still struggling to maintain pride. "Dad, if you were upset, you could have just talked to me. How could you embarrass me like this?" Her voice revealing the pain. I responded, "You were not embarrassed by my uninvited own father. You did not hesitate others to speak to me as if I was beneath their standards. This is not embarrassment. This is consequence." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, I saw Sophie not as the confident bride standing her gown, but as the little girl who used to run into my arms after school. Her voice softened, losing its sharpness. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I nodded gently and said, "But you did, and pain is not erased with excuses. It is healed with truth and humility." At that moment, Ethan, my grandson, Nathan's nephew, stepped into the room holding a framed photo of my late wife, Linda. He had driven with me that morning, without Sophie's knowledge. He approached Sophie and whispered, "Aunt Sophie, Grandma wanted Grandpa to walk you down the aisle. She told me that before she died." Sophie's shoulders dropped as the weight of that truth settled into her heart. The entire atmosphere changed. The arrogance that had filled the room dissolved. Nathan, who had been quiet until now, looked at me and said, "We can still fix this. We can bring the vendors back. We can start in a few hours." I looked at him and answered, "A wedding can be rescheduled. A broken heart cannot. Today is not about a ceremony. It is about what it was built on. And this one was built without honor." Nathan's mother tried to interrupt, but her husband placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. The reality had settled in. This was not a man acting out of spite. This was a father reclaiming dignity. Sophie's tears finally fell. She took a step toward me and asked in a trembling voice, "Dad, what do I do now?" I gently replied, "You begin again, not as a bride in a dress, but as a daughter who remembers what love really looks like. She looked around the empty hall. Everything she thought mattered was gone. All that remained was truth. And in that vulnerable moment, she nodded, slowly realizing that the wedding she had been planning was never about love. It was about image, and image fades. But the love of a father, once betrayed, must be earned back, not entitlement. The entire room stood still, and for the first time since this entire journey began, my daughter saw me, not as a burden, not as a man who didn't fit her image, but as her father, the man who had loved her, raised her, and was now showing her the most important lesson of her life. The silence inside the venue lingered long after Sophie stopped crying. She stood in the middle of the bare hall, still wearing her wedding dress, but stripped of everything she once believed made this day beautiful. There were no chandeliers casting golden light, no music playing softly in the background, no smiling guests waiting to be impressed. It was just her choices, and the consequences of forgetting the very foundation that her life was built upon. For the first time, she didn't try to justify anything. She didn't blame Nathan or his family. She simply looked at me with eyes that were no longer filled with pride, but with awakening. "Dad," she said in a quiet voice, "I forgot what mattered." I stepped closer, not to lecture, but to offer what every parent hopes their child will finally understand, not through words spoken, but through felt. "A wedding is not a performance," I said softly. "It is a promise, and a promise that begins with shame or pride will never lead to peace." Nathan, who had remained silent, walked towards Sophie and took her hand, but even he had tears in his eyes. For all his status and influence, he could not hide from the truth that now surrounded them. His parents stood in the background, no longer able to control the narrative. They were quiet, humbled, realizing that real honor could not be bought with elegance. It had to be earned through respect. Sophie turned to the framed photo of her mother that Ethan was still holding. She reached out and gently touched the edge of the frame. "Mom would be disappointed in me," she whispered. I placed my hand on her shoulder and said, "No, she would be heartbroken, but she wouldn't stay heartbroken. She would ask what you learned." Sophie nodded, her voice trembling as she said, "I want to make it right." In that moment, I knew that as much as the day had revealed, it had also healed. The goal was never to take her happiness away. It was to wake her up to the truth that happiness built on pride is temporary, but happiness built on love and humility is everlasting. The following week, Sophie came to my house, not as a bride with demands, but as a daughter seeking guidance. Gone were the expensive wedding binders and designer plans. Instead, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a notebook and said, "Dad, I want to have a wedding that honors Mom. I want you to walk me down the aisle. I want a small ceremony with people who truly care." Her voice was honest. There was no manipulation, no sense of entitlement, only sincerity. I smiled and said, "Then we will plan it together, as a family." For the first time since my wife passed, I felt something return to my heart, a sense of purpose and peace. Nathan also came forward with humility. He apologized not only to me, but to everyone he had dismissed. He took accountability, admitting he had allowed his family's influence to overpower his own judgment. He said, "From this point on, I want to build a marriage based on respect, not image. And that begins with respecting the man who raised the woman I love." I accepted his apology, not with excitement, but with quiet acceptance. Words are only the beginning. Actions would prove if those words were true. As weeks passed, preparations were for a simple ceremony in our family garden, the same my wife once filled with roses and laughter. Friends and family gathered, not dressed in designer gowns, but in kindness. There were no golden arches or ice sculptures. Instead, we had folding chairs, homemade food, wildflowers picked by hand, and a small table holding my wife's photo with a lit candle beside it. When it came time for the ceremony, Sophie took my arm. She looked into my eyes and said, "I lost my way, but you helped me find my heart again." As we walked down the aisle, it wasn't quiet because of absence. It was quiet because everyone there felt the power of what was happening. This was not just a wedding. This was restoration. After the ceremony, Sophie stood to give a speech. She looked at me and said, "My father did more than cancel a wedding. He saved me from forgetting who I am. Today I begin my marriage not as someone seeking approval from strangers, but as someone blessed to be my father's daughter." Her voice broke, and as she hugged me, I knew my wife would have been proud, not of the wedding, but of the transformation. From that day forward, our home changed. Conversations were deeper, gratitude was expressed more freely, and Sophie visited often, not out of obligation, but out of desire. She no longer needed grand stages to feel worthy. She had found her worth in the eyes of the people who truly loved her. And through it all, I learned something important too. Loving your child sometimes means stepping back, and sometimes it means standing up, not to control them, but to protect the values that will protect their future. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the true meaning of family and respect, subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. Your voice matters here.